Hi, and very good afternoon to you. It's Jim from maverickstar Observatory. Guys, as you can see in the last video that we did, the title was Are You 1 in 2000? Let's see, pole shift news, grand solar minimum and climate change. As usual, we had 3 people that chipped in a bit of support, and the reason why it's important is because it shows how much people are committed to actually trying to do something about the things that we all face as big problems, and we're going to get into them. We're going to come back to this subject a little bit later on in the video, but that gives you a clear idea. There wasn't, like I thought there would be, 1 in 2000. They're more like 1 in 1.3 thousand. So very rare people, but it just is a demonstration of how prepared people are to actually put their own money into something, even though they're not prepared or committed to do something about it themselves. And what do I mean by that? Okay, let's just give a little for instance, and then we'll move on with the topic of what we mainly want to cover. But this is very important. Let's just go for an example, just to take somebody away for a day out in the UK, and this is the same for any other Western country at the moment. If you're going to drive to the beach and it's a couple of hours drive away, you're going to use £50 in fuel there and back. Probably going to want to buy fish and chips for just 2 people. That will cost you £20 with a can of Coke each. Can of Coke for 2 people is £2.40 in this country, and we're paying now on average around £1.99 a litre of diesel, or in some places I've seen it as much as £2.05p. I said as soon as we cross that threshold of £2, it is open season on the driver, because they will go straight up to £3, and we'll be back where we're faced right now with a little bit of puckering up just before it crosses that threshold of £2 per litre. It's like in America, when you see £10 a gallon arrive on the pumps, if you haven't already, you're going to start to think about the costs of things. But the point is this, is that if you've got a family and you only earn say £400 a week, just to do that little trip with your kids, if you've got a couple of kids and a couple of adults, it's going to come to nearly £150 to £200 just to do that little trip. And what I think is going to become a common scene in the school holidays with parents is them taking them to the parks for picnics, because it costs very little, and there's a local park where the journey can either be done by walking there, short train trip, or even a short drive to that park. And they're going to prepare the food at home, because obviously it's cheaper than eating out. These are the things that we're going to have to start seeing. It's a real shame, because the ones that are going to miss out are the children. I think they deserve to be spoiled a little bit, but it's becoming really hard for those parents to do that. I understand that. We'll come back to this. Like I said, those are the alternatives. You either pay through the nose, you pay half your week's wages out to take out on a little journey for that 1-day trip, or you find an alternative. So I can see people playing cricket, taking a frisbee, and ball games and things like that they used to do probably 20-30 years ago, before we had that beautiful period of time where it was feasible to take your kids away in the car, have a meal out and spoil and treat themselves a little bit. Those days are going, and the reason why they're going is because things are changing. We're going to start with just a couple of the main things that are changing, and what global governments are doing that are forcing our pockets to resort to such measures as what I've just discussed. So let's have a look at some of the main things. And what I'm trying to do here is educate people, and the only way I can do that is by using truth and facts. And some of the work is done by myself, some of it is done by companies that I've gone onto the internet. So I've cherry picked some of these things for you, for your benefit, so that you get an idea of what really is going on, and what really is causing the big problems around the world. And therefore you can make a biased decision, or unbiased decision, whichever it is, on whether there's some truth to what I'm saying. And if there is, then the only way to overcome some problems that we face is by actions. These problems never fix themselves. An alcoholic will never come off alcohol if he's not prepared to, do the first things that's required for him to do that, or a drug addict, or someone that's addicted to a specific behaviour. It could be obesity, it could be lots of things these days. But the point is, it requires actions to change the course of, what you'll be facing in the future. And I'm just going to say this right now. If you can't help yourselves and you're not prepared to do, the right thing, if you can't help others that are prepared to do it, then, we come back to this situation. How is something going to get better? We have 8 billion people on this planet, and it's only less than 1% that rule it and govern it in such a bad manner of which they do. And yet people are in the belief that they've got no physical power to change it. That is the illusion that has been created over tens of years now. Your kids go to school and they are being educated about man-made climate change through emitting CO2. And it's a lie. And now head teachers are being pressurised to put this into the curriculum for your kids to learn. And I'm going to show you just a few matters of hypocrisy in this video, and then you can find out for yourselves. You can see for yourselves, especially if you do a little bit of research. Maybe, if anything, this video will encourage you to do at least a little bit more research to find out whether the things that we discuss on this channel are actually true or not. Other than talking about these things that are affecting everybody, we do some real science here at this observatory, and I've been told over the weekend that I'm stirring up trouble on a few channels because I keep telling people that the reason why they should support us is because we actually do the work. We've built the electronics, we've programmed the electronics, and we've got the electronics out into the field where no other channel on YouTube has even done those things. And I say, for that reason, if anyone deserves, a little bit of support, it's us, because we're actually doing the science here. We've got an official observatory. Others are just merely talking about these things. I want to get into some facts now, and you can make up those decisions for yourself. So let's start with one of the big problems that we're facing that's really hitting our pockets from all angles. Let's begin there. So I'm going to begin at no other place than the United Nations, and COP27 will be taking place between the 7th and 18th of November this year, 2022. Now, all the countries have primarily agreed with COP20 anything, 25, 26, 27 and whatever, that they should put this money set aside to fight climate change. Starting with the most poorest countries that are experiencing climate change now. The money that they're talking about is over 100, I think it's 1 trillion, is it? 100 billion? Anyhow, the number is, in terms of cash, enough to fill aircraft hangars galore. And the thing is, they can't do nothing about it, even if they do raise this money. But the point is that they're saying that they need to do it because of a few reasons. Climate change, creating situations where islands or island nations are suffering through sea level rising. Now, they don't give any credit anymore to plate tectonics. I mean, what's to say that Ireland isn't sitting on a big plate that's on a subduction zone, or a convergent zone, or a divergent zone? And I could easily demonstrate what these are with two pieces of paper, but basically two plates that come together, or two plates that are being pulled apart, or a plate that is going under the other one. If it's going under the other one, then anything like an island that's sitting on it would appear to be going under the water. Or to those people that are not intelligent enough to work out that, it could also be a good excuse for them to believe that the sea levels are rising on this earth. Now, there's a couple of experts in that field that I know that are no longer in the business of working with anything to do with the science of the earth changes that are taking place, and that's simply because they have seen more than enough to realise that whatever they say would not make any difference. And I'll just get to the point. What they're talking about is where the levels of sea are being measured, And there is only one place to measure these sea level rises, if they even occur, and they don't, is at the equator. And where they're being measured is everywhere other. And like I say, the debate on whether they're on these islands that are sinking or suffering from sea level rising are on subduction zones. They've not even entered that debate, just like they will now shut the debate down on climate change. But basically, COP27 will be taking place to enforce now the agreed unanimous decision to raise this money to take action. So it mainly is money being raised for, industry to change, to prevent man putting CO2 into the atmosphere, which causes global warming. I was on this United Nations website where they talk about climate change. I showed you in the spoof video the other day, where I made a bit of comedy out of it, that what they was talking about was nonsense. And I'll just rebut that again with some facts for you, so you can see what I'm talking about. They will not change, in essence, they will not change a damn thing, even if they raise the money that they're trying to raise, because the amount of influence that man has on the environment is negligible. And I'll show you how that is right now. Now, this chart was created by me, as you can see on the bottom. We've got CO2 detectors that monitor the levels of atmospheric CO2 in the atmosphere. I could go on a lot about other things, how much CO2 is in your living room, which is around about 1,500 parts per million at any given time when a couple of people are in that room, or sometimes even just one. But it doesn't harm you. The level of oxygen always remains constant. We've got atmospheric oxygen monitors, and we know that. We do that regularly, 2-3 times a month. Take samples of how much oxygen is in the atmosphere, like we do the CO2. But here's the basic facts. CO2 in the atmosphere, which is man-made and naturally occurring, comes to the amount of 0.4%. That in itself is not a main gas in our environment. It is a necessary gas in our environment for all the vegetation on our planet, because without that the plant life would die. In fact, the plant life would begin to die, or at least some species would already be dead if the levels went down to 200 parts per million. So it's a good job that we have a healthy amount of what is really plant food in the atmosphere, and it doesn't harm it if it goes up to even levels, or harm humans if it goes up to levels of 1,000 parts per million. But this is the bogeyman that they've chose to pick on in order to raise a lot of money for some reason. Out of that 0.4%, the actual amount that man actually emits, as you can see on the red pie chart in yellow, is 0.012%. The rest is naturally occurring. So our oceans and the land naturally emits many more gigatons than what humans do. This is the only evidence that is required to prove that the influence that man has on the global climate is zero, negligible, hardly worth even mentioning. Yet they've chose this because people are not educated to the true facts of the matter. And it's easy when you never see them when they're arguing the case produce these two pie charts, because if they did, no one would believe them. But yet, because they put it on the TV showing people, indigenous people that live on these islands, sinking because of sea level rising, they show these tornadoes that they suppose are on the increase because of climate change, and this, that and the other. They cherry pick the data just like the temperature records that goes back to the 1900s. The Michael Mann temperature chart is the famous one that they use, and that guy, I believe now, has had to go in hiding. But I will tell you, it has changed science on a whole, this has, because there are a lot of scientists and good climate scientists that have given up their jobs because of the lies now that is being told and the threats that's been made to them. And of course, when you're talking about raising trillions of pounds there's obviously a lot of pressure that could be applied on someone if you're going to stand in the way of them getting that money. And they've not been successful yet, thankfully, because no way in the world can we afford to pay this sort of money to fight something that doesn't exist in any case. But you know, the truth is there in front of us. We're looking at how much CO2 that is being put into the atmosphere, and you know how much we are really responsible, and that is nothing. We're not responsible for anything. Let me show you something as well whilst we're on the topic of CO2. Here's the last 450,000 years of CO2 records alongside temperature records. First, you'll note that temperature rises before CO2 rises. There's a threshold of around about 6 degrees Celsius either way. But what you'll notice is that CO2 drops off when the temperature starts to go lower. Now, I just want to say, we weren't even supposed to be here on this planet 400,000 years ago, man. And if the Industrial Revolution began in the 1760s, then how did CO2 start to rise 200,000 years ago? How did it rise 350,000 years ago? And how did it rise 450,000 years ago? There was no industrial revolutions in this period of time, yet CO2 rose because of the fluctuation of that 6 degrees. That 6 degrees Celsius is what puts us in a glacial period or takes us out of a glacial period into an interglacial period. Now, let's just address at the end of the chart on the right hand side that big spike of CO2 where we are at right now, 447 parts per million or thereabouts. Yet we don't see it on any other core sample measurements. And the reason why I believe that is that because we are looking for a 40-year time period in the peak of the interglacial period that is so hard to detect. They've never found it before, but we can clearly see that it's here today because we've got machines that monitor it right now as it here is in the atmosphere. What I'm saying to you here is that we need to do more refined measurements on the core samples during the peak of the interglacial period to find out whether levels did in fact go up to 400 parts per million. I believe they would, and I believe in 100,000 years, if we're looking at this present time now in a core sample, we would see the pattern that we've seen for the last 300 years, because what we're looking for is a needle in the haystack. We're taking such a fine sliver out of the 100,000 year record that it's really hard to find. One 30-year, 40-year slot in 100,000 years is a needle in a haystack, and that's why we don't see it appear in the past record. What we need to do is go back into them core samples and look more closer at the peaks for CO2 levels, and I bet you if we do, we'll find that they're in the same levels of what there are today. There is no difference about the amounts of CO2 that humans are putting at this present time compared back to the years. First of all, humans weren't here, and some would argue, well, that peak is because the humans are here now. It's bullshit, because if you look at the CO2 charts I've just showed you, it's showing for 0.4% total CO2 in the atmosphere, and out of that is a very, very sliver amount of CO2. It could never affect the climate in any way. So there's something wrong in the way we've done the core samples over the past 450,000 years, and you can see why it would be very difficult for us to find that area in there in the interglacial period where it would show the same amount of CO2 levels as what we're seeing today. This is human corruption that we're looking at. They've not purposely showed the rise in CO2 over those period of years, or it was that hard to find, it's lost. It's either one of those two. I guarantee you this much: it is not man-made. The climate change is nothing responsible to man. I mean, look, in the last 30 years there's been a lot of things coincidentally taking place. One, for instance, is this. This is the last 3 solar cycles that we've experienced, and look at the solar activity in terms of sunspots, how it's dropped off. Are you telling me this has no effect on the environment or the climate on our planet? If that is the case, then just explain, what it is other than the sun that warms our planet. It's crazy. It's not a blanket that mankind has wrapped around the earth, like they're saying, of CO2. It's nothing to do with that. Are you telling me it's nothing to do with the fact that the magnetic poles on our planet are reversing? The magnetosphere is weakening. Our magnetosphere is the first thing that has direct contact with the solar radiance. You know, the heat that comes off the sun. It's the first thing that interacts with that. You're telling me that this has nothing to do with the changes of climate on our Earth, especially when we know now that, you know, when we have an increase in cosmic rays or solar radiation, you know, those particles interact with the upper atmospheric particles, creating more subatomic particles in the collisions, but also creating platforms where vapor condensates on, and therefore we end up with more water and jet streams. You're telling me that this has nothing to do with climate? It's insane. These two things, grand solar minimum, the magnetic pole shift, has been omitted from the table in the discussion of climate. You know, that debate has been shut down now, and they are steadfast in the course of stating that man is responsible for global warming. Al Gore said in 2014, our children would never experience what snow was like because snow wouldn't ever form on our planet again. He said the ice caps by 2014 would disappear. He's a Nobel Prize winner. We've passed 2014. We have ice caps at the current moment increasing in mass of ice over the northern hemisphere, at least. And yet he still holds his Nobel Peace Prize. It's wrong, guys. Now I want to talk about this, and I know I'm going to get hit because I've showed a really good day for renewables. At this present time, we've got a bit of solar power coming into the grid here in the UK. We also have 9.8 gigawatts of energy being produced via wind power, and this is one of them better sweet days for renewables, trust me. And the reason why I'm showing you is because I don't want to show you on the worst day just to prove my point. But the point is this: look, even on these sweet days where there's wind and sun, right, and they produce 42% of the energy necessary for the UK, right at this point in time we're using 41% fossil fuels. And why am I talking about that? Because it's CO2, isn't it, being released to produce the energy? And what their argument would be, we haven't got enough renewables, we don't have enough wind generators, we don't have enough solar panels. Let me tell you something now. I have seen renewable energy tank regularly throughout the weeks that I've been watching it, and it does not meet up to what it's supposed to do right now. And they're going to say, well, we just need more of it. It won't work even if they get more of it, because we get days where the sun is not as efficient as it is right now, and we get definitely a lot of days where the wind just isn't producing 1 gigawatt, let alone 9 as it is at the moment. But the point is this: they're saying you need to change your car and go battery. There's a couple of problems with this. First of all, to produce an ordinary car combustion engine from the manufacturing totals, it's going to cost, in terms of CO2, 6 tons. That's as it stands in the showroom. That's before you start filling it up with, you know, petroleum. The Tesla costs 12 tons of CO2 to produce. Now I just want to talk about briefly the environmental impacts on both cars, because Tesla is, it's not just Tesla, it's all electric cars. They are polluting our environment because of the need to refine things like lithium. If you look at what's going on in the countries like, I don't know, South Americas, where a lot of these materials come from, like in Africa, cobalt, lithium, and have a look at the environmental impacts it's having on these regions. That's just on the environmental impacts. We are omitting in the discussion here, you know, the tragedy of women, children and elderly people having to go and mine these materials. And then we'll also omit the subject of, you know, there isn't enough to replace every car in the UK with an electric car because the materials just don't simply exist on the planet. So how the whole world is going to convert over to electric is beyond me. But the point is that if you've got an electric car right at this moment and you plug it in, you are using 6 times more electricity than the average family. And at this precise moment, nearly 50% of the energy that you're charging up that car is through gas production. And when you burn natural gas, you create CO2 emissions. I hope that you realise, if you do own one of these electric cars, that you're actually damaging the environment more than what you would if you just brought a combustion engine. The other thing is that because you're only half sensible if you own one of these electric cars, you're going to plug that little baby in on the night time because you want that half price electricity. I just want to ask you how much of that solar power is going into that actual car to charge it up at that time of the night. Yes, right, 0. And if there's no wind being produced, then the majority of the energy that you're charging your car up with is produced by gas, oil and coal. And therefore you're emitting more CO2 than an ordinary family would. And that is about as green as that story gets, I'm afraid. Electric cars are certainly not the solution to anyone. And this is why our energy costs have gone up in the UK the way they have. They've doubled and tripled. It's because of the amount of people that are plugging the cars in on the evenings now, when peak ends and off peak begins, which is the discount you get for using electricity more at the nighttime rate. It's because they've had to now substitute gas to burn on the evenings so that people can charge up their electric cars. And if you drive around in the UK, you will know that they are becoming very frequent and more so on the roads. And that's the truth of the matter. This is why 7% of the 50% of the families can't afford to take the kids to a nice little day trip on the beach. It's because the fuel prices have gone up, because there is more than an incentive now by these billionaires to put the prices up on fuel because it's good. They say they're being environmentally friendly. It's not that the crude oil has changed. The cost of crude oil has changed, because if you look at crude oil prices, they've on a whole maintained themselves. It's the greedy forecourts that are putting up the prices now and ripping us all off. And Biden himself has even had a go, even though he turned round. I remember in one of his speeches, he turned round to one of the kids and he says, "Look at me in the eyes, I am going to end CO dirty industries in my term of being the president." Well, the other day there was a tweet from the White House saying, complaining about the gas stations prices being as high as they are when it doesn't reflect the cost of the crude oil that they're purchasing it, and he's asking them now to put the price down. Just doesn't make any sense. It's very hypocrisy, but the whole thing about this comes back down to just this one thing, and that one thing is CO2 that is produced by man that is added to the atmospheric composition of gases. And as you can see, and as I've explained many times, it is negligible. So what else can they do with that money other than wax themselves rich? And here's the thing, the reason why this is happening is because people are not motivated enough to think that they can change anything. And if that's the case, it's like the drug addict or the alcoholic. He's never going to get off alcohol because he can never see a day where he is off it. That's the reality that we live in. We've been conditioned to think like this over the years. And if you think we're a society now that is less motivated than any other on this planet during our history, then you just wait and see how motivated our younger children are when they are brainwashed by the curriculum of our schools and headmasters that they teach now on this bogus science of climate change is caused by man-made CO2. You know, if you're not prepared to do nothing about it, then why not help somebody else that is? You know, even if we can't directly interfere in, you know, changing the policies here at the observatory, you know, at least we can track the levels of CO2 so that we can call them out in the future if they say that they are risen above, you know, numbers that they say they are. At least we can prove what levels they're at. You know, if we raised enough money here at the observatory, maybe we could do our own core samples and focus on those peak points of interglacial periods over the last 450,000 years. If we could find that golden region where CO2 levels were at the same as what they are, that would just be another tool in our armament. Not that we need any more, but that would be another one. You know, we've already got the tools to take on this argument. It's just that the fact is that they've shut the debate down. And that is exactly what somebody does when they know they're in the wrong. They shut the debate down. And you're seeing that happen to channels on YouTube like mine, like Tony Heller, who talks about these matters. They go after us, they give us strikes, you know. And why? It's because we are directly standing in front of them, robbing the general public of trillions of dollars. We're directly standing in front of them, stopping them getting their way. And at the moment I think we've done a good job, because if no one has actually come to the point where they're going to hand over the money, these countries that make up COP26, COP27, which will be taking place, you know, if they've not give over the money, then obviously they're not convinced, and we may have done something right. So long as there are still some avenues like our channel here and a very few others on YouTube, you know, showing people the true facts of the matter, you know, at least there's a glimmer of hope that something might change. That might be a good reason for you to support us in what we do. But I think you will agree with us. It needs to be at a better rate than 1 in 1,300. That needs to come down a bit more. We need to see a little bit more support for people that are prepared to take out, you know, their time, their professional time, to show people the truth of the matter. Without the support, we simply wouldn't be here. Without the support we've had already, we wouldn't have the equipment we've got, and we wouldn't be monitoring these changes as they are taking place. So, you know, on the back of that, there's a link down there in the description if you want to help support us. I can't see a reason why you would not. And, you know, I think it's really sad when we see thousands of people walk past and not support, you know, the truth. It's a sad time we're living in, and hopefully there's still hope that we can change it. Guys, link down there in the description. I'll say what I usually do. You take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.